like our friend Cusimano. Now, he's Italian, but he's American. He's what my old man would have called a Wonder Bread WOP.
Hey Sopranos fans, and welcome to another episode here on Bully Whispers. Now, I get a lot of comments down in the comment section. What's your favorite episode? Who had the makings of a Varsity Don? Are you going to be introducing any new shows soon, etc.? But the question we will focus on today is Tony a Wonder Bread WOP? Before digging in, I do find it interesting that when trying to explain what a Wonder Bread WOP was to Dr. Melfi, Tony, the godfather of New Jersey, immediately went to food.
He eats his Sunday gravy out of a jar.
Considering how Melfi's ex Richard describes Americans.
Ask any American to describe an Italian American in this country. Invariably is going to reference The Godfather, Goodfellas, good movies. And the rest are going to mention pizza.
But food is something that we will touch on briefly a bit later. So in this episode, we will evaluate whether or not Tony is a Wonder Bread WOP by first looking at the origin and meaning of the term WOP, which proves to be surprisingly apt in this discussion, before moving on to the Wonder Bread part of the term, which brings us to the trip to Italy and a comparison between there and the US, both culturally and in terms of the mafia, and then ending with whether or not Tony is in fact a Wonder Bread WOP. When it comes to what the term WOP means, one of the most common misconceptions is that it means without papers, a supposed reference to them being illegal immigrants. Now, this is something I've known wasn't true since I was a kid, just because my dad pointed out that people were using that term long before the US required documentation to enter, so it just wouldn't make any sense, but I've never actually knew what it meant, so I looked into it. Apparently, the term comes from the Southern Italian pronunciation and slang use of the word guapo, which, loosely translated, refers to someone with swagger. Young male immigrants often referred to each other jokingly as such, and to the American and Irish people now around them, it sounded like they were calling each other wops. Now, where this becomes interesting in terms of this discussion is the slang use of the term in Italy. While young men often jokingly called each other that, generally speaking, it referred to a flashy, swaggering criminal type, so, in that sense, Furio would appear to be a legit and proper WOP, right in line with the term's intended usage, although clearly Wonder Bread wouldn't apply. By these standards, Tony would also qualify as a WOP. He has swagger and he is flashy, maybe not by like Nino Brown standards, but he does have nice suits, nice cars, and a big house, etc. But what about the Wonder Bread part? Quick side note, and let me know in the comments if you disagree. Of all the New Jersey guys, I think Larry Boy, with his facelifts and shoes so nice even Livia complimented them, would most closely fit the bill. Anyways, as to the Wonder Bread part, that term can have a few different connotations to it depending on who is saying it, but in the context Johnny Boy would have been using, as a gangster and member of a recently arrived family, remember he was the first generation of soprano to be born in the US, he would have meant that they were soft and lost touch with their cultural roots. Of course, from the point of view of the Italians in Italy, Tony and all of the American guys would have been considered Wonder Bread WOPs, both in terms of being soft and culturally, but we will get to that in a bit. When it comes to being soft, we see Tony, as well as most of the other guys, do some pretty hardcore stuff throughout the series. Right off the bat in the pilot episode, we see Tony chasing after a guy through an office parking lot while driving Chris's car, and smashing into the guy in broad daylight in front of a building full of witnesses. We see Paulie choke an old lady to death, Richie run over Beansy repeatedly, and Christopher brutally murder Cosette, yet somehow they seem like a softer junior varsity version of their Italian counterparts. But why is that? Well, the answer to that lie in two places: the protection and assertion of power, both of which are shown when they leave the restaurant after having met Don Vittorio. The first part shows the protection of power. After what they think might be gunfire erupts, Furio dives to protect the Don without hesitation, something Tony knows none of his guys would do. In this sense, their softness lies in their selfishness. None of them are truly willing to sacrifice themselves for the cause, so to speak. The next part of this scene shows the assertion of power, although not in the way you may think. The fact that they could make the police leave isn't particularly impressive, considering the New Jersey guys can get the police to ignore a lot of things as well, nor does the fact that they can beat up a woman and what looks like a 13-year-old kid demonstrate any real power. But what it does do is reinforce the fact that they will not hesitate to do something that the Jersey guys wouldn't, as well as them being more direct and forceful in general, which we see in the difference between Chris and Furio in their respective attempts to collect from a brothel. Now, this brings us to the cultural part of the term Wonder Bread, and while we don't see enough of Italy in one episode to make any significant comparison, we do see a decent amount of food. Since Tony went to food first when describing Wonder Bread WOP, as did Richard second, and Wonder Bread outside of the slang use refers to food, we will take a look at that first. Now, all of my regular viewers know from my Machiavellian episode on Phil Leotardo that he is not to be trusted around food.
I jacked off at Manicotti.
But for the most part, everyone other than Adriana and Janice seem to take great care in the cooking process. Clearly, they aren't eating their Sunday gravy out of a jar. However, the Italians' response when Polly wants spaghetti with tomato sauce shows that may not be as common in Italy as they had thought.
So how's the food?
It's okay. Lots of fish.
If only he had thought to ask them to put some chopped up hot dogs in it too, the whole thing may have played out differently. To be fair, they could have been just talking about Polly in general, but looking through the episode, there seems to be very few tomato-based sauces, although the main Italian guy until Don Vittorio shows up does. Now, obviously there is a lot more to any culture than just food, and one of the more significant things, especially the further back you go, is language.
So what brings you to an English-speaking neighborhood?
Which Tony doesn't know. Again, to be fair, we don't know for sure that Johnny Boy or Junior knew Italian, and no, being able to sing a song in a different language doesn't mean you know the language. However, when talking about their brother Ercole, Junior did mention that their parents couldn't speak English. So, unless they were talking to their kids in like German or some other random language...
Oh, you didn't hear me? Maybe if I say it in Swahili.
It's pretty safe to assume that Johnny Boy knew Italian. Now, as to whether or not Tony is a Wonder Bread WOP, he would definitely be considered a WOP, as we've already established, but when it comes to the Wonder Bread part, it depends on how you view it. If you think of it as being soft, then I don't think he is. We see him do way too many hardcore things throughout the series, so while he may not be as brutally direct in his treatment of innocent civilians as the Italians, and definitely not the Germans,
We have ways of dealing with you, Mr. Soprano.
Do you think someone has ever been tortured by use of a gorilla?
he's certainly not soft. If you think of Wonder Bread in terms of being Americanized and having lost touch with your culture to a large degree, then yes, Tony is definitely a Wonder Bread WOP. Well, thanks for watching this episode here on Bully Whispers. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.